Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today really centers on one of the most persistent and complex questions in nutritional science. How do we balance these established population-wide dietary guidelines aimed at minimizing cardiovascular risk against the growing scientific understanding of specific protective compounds found even in foods that those traditional guidelines once told us to strictly limit?
That's right. We're facing a real policy versus biochemistry conflict. The central question is whether heart-healthy recommendations should primarily focus on minimizing known generalized risk factors like high saturated fat and high cholesterol, or if the modern approach has to pivot to leveraging specific beneficial nutrient profiles like monounsaturated fats, antioxidants, even when those foods are calorically dense or, traditionally flagged as risky.
My stance here is clear. For broad public health impact and risk mitigation, we absolutely need to stick to the continued necessity of restrictive guidelines. These are based on the established links between high saturated fat, cholesterol content, and cardiovascular disease. Simplicity, at the end of the day, saves lives when you're managing population risk.
And I will argue for moving beyond that restrictive simplicity. We must adopt a more nuanced focus on the complete nutritional chemistry. I think the specific benefits found in certain foods now obsolete the need for these generalized blanket restrictions, and we are losing key nutrients by adhering to outdated caution.
So my position isn't based on, historical inertia. It's based on established, proven public health interventions. We have massive amounts of epidemiological data demonstrating that high consumption of saturated fats and dietary cholesterol increases circulating LDL cholesterol, which is a key driver of cardiovascular risk. This data is precisely why the medical community developed the Step I and Step 2 diets decades ago.
Tell me more about that framework, because while it's proven in theory, its efficacy is often, underwhelming in practice compared to specific nutritional interventions.
These were interventions born out of necessity. They provided clear, quantifiable targets designed to manage heart health, especially in hypercholesterolemic patients. We're talking about strict limits. No more than 30% of total daily calories from fat, restricting saturated fat to 10% or less of total calories, and keeping dietary cholesterol under 300 milligrams per day. These aren't arbitrary figures. They are the policy response to decades of research showing that systemic restriction yields predictable reductions in population-level risk.
I see why you emphasize the policy framework, but I find the efficacy of that generalized restriction lacking when you compare it to targeted nutritional chemistry. Focusing purely on raw fat or cholesterol counts forces us to ignore vital biochemistry that can actively lower cardiovascular risk. Take the nuts example, a classically high-fat, energy-dense food.
Nuts are often cited, but they are an exception, a plant product with a high concentration of healthy fats.
But they're an exception that proves the rule, that fat content is not the key metric. Studies have demonstrated that incorporating nuts into a diet without other major diet overhauls lowers total cholesterol by as much as 11.3%. Now, if you compare that outcome to the generalized public health approach, the AHA Step 1 diet typically yields about a 5.2% reduction. The targeted chemical intervention is delivering more than double the benefit of the broad restrictive diet.
That's a powerful statistic, I'll grant you. But I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because you're citing a specific intervention, adding nuts, not a sustainable, generalized dietary policy. We have to remember that nuts are extremely calorically dense. For the general population that's struggling with compliance and caloric control, simply adding nuts, which average 170 calories per quarter cup, likely leads to weight gain and cancels out any cholesterol benefit unless compliance is perfect and other calories are cut.
But the reason nuts work so well isn't just because they displace other fats, it's the chemistry. They contain phytosterols, which are plant compounds structurally similar to cholesterol that physically block cholesterol absorption in the gut. They also provide fiber, which further aids in bile acid excretion, pulling cholesterol out of the system. This shows that the type of fat and the accompanying compounds matter far more than the simple total fat percentage. I mean, what about olive oil? It's 95% monounsaturated fatty acids, or MUFS. These MUFS don't just reduce LDL, they do so without negatively impacting HDL, the so-called good cholesterol. The food-specific chemical composition dictates its true impact, not its classification as a high-fat item.
That's a compelling argument for monounsaturated fats, but the caution remains particularly strong concerning animal products, foods inherently high in cholesterol and saturated fats that lack those phytosterols. Foods like liver, which is high in cholesterol and moderately high in saturated fats, or veal, and particularly whole milk products, are flagged as contributing to heart disease risk. The established guidelines exist because these foods represent clear, undeniable risks for population health when consumption is left unchecked.
And this debate becomes especially sharp when we look at foods that are simultaneously nutrient-rich, yet high in the very factors we seek to limit. That's the perfect transition to eggs.
Indeed, a large whole egg contains a substantial 212 milligrams of cholesterol. Given that the Step 1 diet limits total daily cholesterol intake to 300 milligrams, one egg essentially consumes 70% of your allowance. The National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute still recommends limiting intake, often suggesting no more than 4 egg yolks a week, even while acknowledging their overall nutritional density. This restriction is necessary because the sheer concentration of cholesterol mandates caution for the general public.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that generalized fear of cholesterol, particularly in the context of eggs, given what we know about biochemical feedback loops. This restrictive focus entirely overlooks significant, specific health benefits that may justify their inclusion. Yes, eggs are high in cholesterol, but the yolk is also a powerhouse of protective factors. It's a rich source of the yellow-orange carotenoid pigments, lutein and zeaxanthin.
We know those carotenoids are important, but how do they stack up against cardiac risk?
They stack up beautifully, specifically concerning eye health. These pigments are critical for vision, playing a documented role in protecting the eyes from damaging UV light and oxidative stress. The Beaver Dam eye study, for instance, indicated that egg consumption was inversely associated with cataract risk in subjects younger than 65. The benefit here, vision protection, is significant. Why should generalized cholesterol fear, which is often mitigated by the body's own regulatory mechanisms, eclipse a targeted protective benefit against a major age-related disease?
I acknowledge the targeted protective benefits of lutein and zeaxanthin, but cataract risk is distinct from cardiovascular risk. We have to prioritize prevention of the leading cause of death, heart disease. When the guideline is designed to prevent heart attack and stroke, cholesterol limits must take precedence, especially when we consider non-responders whose serum cholesterol does spike dramatically in response to dietary intake.
That assumes everyone is a non-responder, which just isn't true. Furthermore, you are neglecting how dietary cholesterol works for the majority of the population. The body produces cholesterol in the liver. When you consume dietary cholesterol from an egg, the body typically responds by down-regulating its own internal production. This system is complex, but it means that for 70 to 80% of healthy people, the impact of those 212 milligrams of dietary cholesterol on their circulating blood cholesterol is marginal. The decision to restrict eggs based on a generalized limit ignores the body's highly efficient mechanism for regulating homeostasis.
Ignoring the minority of hyperresponders is irresponsible public health policy. Simple restriction protects everyone equally. And that takes us directly to the role of specific fats and fatty acids. I recognize that not all fats are equal, but the complexity of teaching the public to distinguish between saturated, polyunsaturated, and monounsaturated fats is, well, it's immense.
I come at it from a different way. Complexity should not be a barrier to superior nutrition. We have to reassert that high-fat content is not intrinsically detrimental when the fatty acids themselves are beneficial and bioactive. We talked about nuts, but let's look further at fish and shellfish. These are critical sources of beneficial omega-3 fatty acids.
Which are essential, but we still need clarity.
Precisely. We need to be specific. We're talking about the long-chain, highly unsaturated fatty acids, eicosapentaenoic acid, EPA, and docosahexaenoic acid, DHA. These aren't just minor components. They're incorporated into cell membranes and play a profound anti-inflammatory role. Studies explicitly link the consumption of these omega-3s to a reduced risk of sudden cardiac death. Here, the chemical content is a profound life-saving mitigating factor that completely justifies the intake of what might be labeled a high-fat food.
I certainly acknowledge the profound benefits of EPA and DHA. However, this is exactly where my policy concerns arise. We introduce exceptions, nuts, olive oil, fatty fish, and suddenly the general public assumes all high-fat food is fine. How do they distinguish EPA and DHA from the kind of saturated fatty acids prevalent in most terrestrial animal products?
We educate them on quality and sources.
And that's where the system breaks down. We have to consider the generalized structure of common cooking fats. For example, animal fats vary widely, but most high-consumption fats lack these redeeming qualities. Beef fat has proportionally more saturated fatty acids than pork fat. Then consider a simple, common ingredient like butter. It's not just high in saturated fat. What is it, 7.1 grams per tablespoon? It is also highly prone to oxidation, and it burns quickly at a low temperature of 250 degrees Fahrenheit. These are pervasive sources that demonstrate the continued generalized risk posed by high saturated fat consumption, reinforcing the need for restriction as the safest default.
That's a compelling argument regarding simplicity, but intellectual charity is essential to productive discourse. We cannot allow the difficulty of public explanation to justify the oversimplification that results in denying the public access to superior nutritional options or confusing beneficial compounds like MUFAs with detrimental saturated fats.
But we must also consider the overall nutritional composition and absorption efficiency. When discussing the necessity of certain animal products, we move past just fat and look at key micronutrients. Take liver. It is the single best natural source of heme iron. Heme iron is fundamentally different chemically from the non-heme iron found in plants. It is 5 times more available to the body. This is a crucial, easily absorbed nutrient.
I agree that heme iron is highly available, but that doesn't validate liver consumption as a general recommendation given its cholesterol and saturated fat load.
My point is about inherent nutritional power versus reliance on manipulation. Lean beef provides substantial iron. A 4-ounce serving of sirloin offers 3.81 milligrams. But consider the nutritional complexity required to obtain that same benefit from plants. To maximize iron absorption from plant-based sources like beans, they must be served with meat, the meat factor, or with vitamin C-rich foods such as tomatoes or peppers. This reliance on combination or manipulation to achieve absorption suggests inherent nutritional limitations in components like non-heme plant iron, reinforcing the idea that some high-fat, high-cholesterol animal products offer non-negotiable, easily accessed nutritional benefits that we restrict at our peril.
I just don't buy that limitation argument. The necessity of combining foods, like combining beans and grains to create complete proteins, or pairing vitamin C with iron sources, is not a sign of deficiency. It is the essence of holistic, intelligent eating. It's biochemistry at work, guiding us towards synergistic consumption. Furthermore, the informed preparation you referenced allows us to safely utilize even the higher-risk meats you mentioned.
How so? If we acknowledge the risk of saturated fat in things like lamb or veal, how do we mitigate that risk without simply excluding them?
Through physical intervention during cooking. Cooking methods like broiling or roasting meats, such as lamb or veal, allows the fat to melt and run off, physically reducing the saturated fat content of the final product significantly before consumption. This is a practical, informed intervention.
That addresses fat reduction, but you still have the issue of oxidation. When high-fat meats are cooked at high heat, you increase the risk of lipid peroxidation, which is highly detrimental, particularly when fats are reheated later.
Even that can be mitigated chemically, showing that informed eating doesn't just stop at choosing the food, it extends to preparing it. Oxidized fats contribute to that recognizable, unpleasant, warmed-over flavor the next day. However, research shows that cooking meat with vitamin C-rich vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, or citrus marinades acts as a chemical antioxidant blanket.
An antioxidant blanket? Explain the mechanism there.
Vitamin C is a powerful, water-soluble antioxidant. When it's cooked alongside the fat matrix, it reduces the oxidation of those fats, diminishing that warmed-over flavor and potentially mitigating the health risk posed by lipid peroxidation. This proves that high-risk foods can be utilized safely and effectively through informed preparation and a knowledge of nutritional chemistry, rather than requiring wholesale, generalized restriction.
While acknowledging the nuance of specific compounds and the efficacy of both broiling and antioxidant-rich cooking techniques, I still return to the necessity of a policy baseline. Widespread guidelines must prioritize restraint, especially given the clear links between high saturated fat and cholesterol in certain key animal products like liver, veal, and whole milk, and the increased cardiovascular risk. The continued reliance on the strict Step 1 and 2 diets confirms that restriction remains the most effective and safest baseline for general public health advice.
The evidence clearly supports moving beyond simple quantity metrics to embrace food quality and specific chemistry. The protective components we've detailed today, the cholesterol homeostasis feedback in most healthy adults, the vision-protecting lutein in eggs, the LDL-lowering effect of nuts driven by phytosterols, the superior heme iron in meat, and the vital omega-3s in fish, all of it demonstrates that a truly heart-healthy diet requires informed consideration of specific nutritional components. Wholesale exclusion based on outdated generalizations about fat content ultimately limits access to valuable protective factors.
This material forces us to confront the reality that nutritional decisions reside in a complex balance between minimizing generalized established risks for a diverse population and maximizing specific evidence-backed health benefits for an informed individual.
And that balance shifts as our understanding of molecular nutrition deepens. The source material strongly suggests that the future of heart-healthy eating involves equipping the consumer with the knowledge of biochemistry rather than simply issuing categorical warnings based on simple calorie or fat counts. There is certainly much more to explore in the material regarding this chemical versus policy dichotomy,